would not be happening. I can promise. So today I just want to introduce the topic of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is, you could call it the medical system of India that preceded the modern medical system. It's been around for thousands of years. We don't know how long because when writing was invented, Ayurveda was already fully developed. So when you ask the Indians, they say, well, it's always been there. And Ayurveda means science of life. So I think the first question that's valid is it a science? Now, what's our modern science of life is called biology. And if you ask a biologist, is Ayurveda a science? They would certainly say, no, it isn't. And they would say, where's the experiments? Where's the mathematics? Where's the objectivity, and on and on. So the science that we've been brought up on is based on a few beliefs. And they're not usually stated as beliefs, but more as facts. So we've grown up with the idea that there's an objective world that is out there, and there's an independent you that is in here, and you are the subject who views the objects of the universe. And the idea is that there's an objective universe that's composed of atoms and molecules, the forces that act on them, electromagnetic waves, gravity, on and on. And it's governed by random chance and those laws of physics. And so we're taught that we can't see the objective world because we are subjective. That is, our nervous systems convert the reality of waves and particles into what our experience of life. So experience in our science is viewed as very suspect. The mind creates life out of the particles and forces. Now, the science that is Ayurveda, they didn't have any of those beliefs. Nobody had yet invented the objective world or subjectivity. When they looked at they would say that experience is not only not suspect, it's all there is. How do you know you're alive? Because you see, hear, feel, smell, taste the objects of the world, if you want to say it that way. But life is only experience. How do you know you're thinking? You hear the thoughts. How do you know you're feeling? There's a sensation that goes along with that. They would even say, how do you know you have a body? The body itself is a set of experiences, a set of sensations. So for the scientists that came up with Ayurveda, and they call their scientists rishis, and rishis means seers. And so their whole science, and to become a rishi, you don't go to school, but you meditate and you learn through discipline, to develop your ability to perceive. And the goal of the rishi, when the rishi is trying to understand a phenomena, is to merge his or her consciousness with the phenomena. And so that the observer becomes the observed, because the observer, if you just stick to experience, is also experience. There is no separate observer viewing something out there from in here. There's only experience. So I don't know if that makes sense to people. That's a hard concept to understand, because our concept of the objective world is so ingrained, and it's hard for us to see that we came up with that as a concept. We don't know if there's an objective world. If we're sticking to facts and truth, all we know is we have an experience of being alive. And so the rishi, the science of Ayurveda, is let's delve into the experience and try to understand experience. So at this point, Neil, we're ready for the first slide here.
Sec. Share screen.
Okay, so this is our, what's going to follow at this point is a series of illustrations. And these came to me in a period of, about 7, 8, 9 years ago. I just somehow was inspired to make this group of paintings. And this first illustration here just shows that if we stick to experience, how do we start to understand and categorize our experiences? So the definition of science is that it's a systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject. And Ayurveda is certainly systematic and organized, and so is Taoism. And that's this illustration here comes from Taoism, which I think is a good place to start briefly. So if we stick to experience, what you'll see is if we direct our attention to that top disc, that yin and yang figure that everybody's familiar with, all of our experiences are relative. That is, you only know an experience in, you can say, in opposition to the opposite experience. And for example, if I'm sitting here, there's a direction called up. There's a direction I can think of as down, and I have a left and a right. So if I'm sitting here and there's a floor above me, that floor above me is now up. However, if I go upstairs and the ceiling where I'm looking at now would be below. So the up and down, above and below are simply relative concepts. And you can apply this to any experience that you have. Now, for example, if we think of temperature, well, so we have the experience of hot and the experience of cold. What's the limit of hot? Well, you can always go hotter. You can have heat that would destroy anything that it comes into contact with. And then you can go all the way to the other end of hot, you'd have cold. And this is also played out in that what below this figure is supposed to be a pendulum there, going from light to dark and back again. And the experience continuously moves from one experience to the other. And as it does so, it tends to go from one extreme back to the other extreme, or one pole, or towards one pole or towards the other pole. So if I say temperature, you think hot and cold. Well, what's hot? Is 100 degrees hot? Well, if I'm thinking about the temperature of the day, then 100 degrees is a hot day. If it's my body temperature, then 100 degrees is a hot temperature. That's a fever. How about if I'm trying to cook dinner and I set my oven to 100 degrees? Now 100 degrees becomes cold. I can't cook anything in it. So again, the temperature, it's all relative. How about if we think of opinions? You have opinions in politics, a big thing to us these days. We have opinions on the left and we have opinions on the right, and your opinion can appear anywhere on that spectrum. Which opinion is the true opinion, right? So what's the true temperature? What's the true direction? So these are just relativities on a pendulum swing or on a spectrum. And each opinion could have an equal and opposite opinion that someone else believes just as fervently as you believe your opinion. So opinions are also on a relative scale. And if you think, is there anything in your life that's outside of the totality of this relative understanding, or this, what's called a duality, the living in a tension between opposites? And so the meaning of the disc above is that everything fits into that. So what we call the universe could just as well, and I think truthfully be said, to be considered the sum of our experiences. And so everything is experience. So if we're scientists, let's investigate experience, because that's all there is. Is there an objective world? We don't know. how could you prove there was a world outside of experience that causes experience? Because by the very definition of the objective world, you can't experience it because you're subjective. So it's strictly a concept. You don't know if it exists or not. And in 1927, Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein had a famous argument about that very subject. And Niels Bohr said, if there is an objective world, you're never going to know it. So, because the mind only can see its ideas. So this, I'm not making any of this up. This is all well known and well discussed in the 20th century. So all we have is experience. And so if you're a rishi, you know that you're delving into experience. And the rishis, through categorizing their observations, discovered that there are 5 elements that are present in every experience. So that's slide number 2, sir, if you would be so kind. So here now, I only have 4 elements listed in this picture. The 5th element is space. Now, I made this particular poster for a presentation that was not Ayurvedic, so I didn't put space in there. But the first element would be the space that we occupy. And in our science and mathematics, space is the X, Y, and Z axes. You remember that from school. So space is limitless and it's always present. Can you think of any experience that does not occur in space? And space goes forever in every direction. There's no limit to it. Now, in Ayurveda, you're going to look at, well, what other qualities does space have? How can I recognize space? And if you look at my background, well, there's space. So Neil did a great job of setting me up for the beginning of this lecture. So space would be dark, right? There's no light in it until light is created. At this point, we have just space. It's the void. So cold, pure, empty. So you think of any experience that has those qualities will be related to space. So that element will always be present. And air, as we typically would consider it in an elemental discussion, includes the concept of space, and it includes the experience of wind or movement. So all movement would be related to the wind. So in every experience that you can have, there's always going to be movement, because life is never stagnant. It is always that pendulum that from the previous illustration is always swinging back and forth, back and forth. And so all movement will relate back to the wind. So in Ayurveda, what I'm calling air in this picture is divided into space, but also wind. And what does the wind do? So you want to think of all, the associations with the wind. So in addition to moving things, the wind tends to dry things out. So the wind has a drying quality. So yesterday I hung my laundry on the line and it was windy. And does the laundry dry faster on a windy day or a still day? So obviously the wind will drive the laundry out faster. As it dries, it tends to shrink things down and it tends to have an erosive quality. If anybody has ever gone to the, out west and they have those beautiful rock formations that are shaped by the wind tends to shrink the rock down and it carves and etches in it by blowing sand against the rock that chips away at it. And the wind is cold, right? So if I have a bowl of soup and it's too hot, I'll blow on it, right? I blow on it to cool it down. So you can associate along with the wind and the air, the dry, the cold. It's rough, it tends to harden things. So there's a lot of other qualities that come along with that. Now, in Ayurveda, they say once the air starts to move, there's friction, and friction creates fire. And in the Bible, first there's the void, which is the space and the wind. There's the spirit moving over the face of the waters. And then God says, let there be light. So Fire as an element is light. What else do we get from fire? Last night we had friends over, we lit a fire. We all stood next to it because it's warm and because people love to stand near fires anyway. So the fire also brings heat. Now, why do we cook our food? If I put a raw chicken into the oven, it's kind of slimy and not very appetizing. I put it in the expose it to fire for an hour. It comes out ready to eat. It's turned into something delicious and yummy to sink your teeth into. So the fire transforms whatever it touches. And transformation is constant. So fire is always present as light, heat, or transformation. Now, air and fire are similar in that they're both buoyant and light, right? So you can't hold the air, you can't hold the fire. Now, as you move into the next element, in Ayurveda, they would say that the heat of the universe condensed as it hit the cold air and condensed into water. So water is very different. Now we have something that you can hold in your hand, and if you let go of it, it'll drop to the floor. So now we have we're in the realm of matter, what we think of as matter. So water is flowing matter. It's the flowing side. Water is easygoing, and it takes the shape of the container. So it has this sort of relaxed property to it. Water dissolves what it holds. So water has a very buoyant and moving quality to it, and it tends to take things into itself. And at its border, now water, if you remember Brownian motion from school, water appears to be still, but on a microscopic level, it's very bouncy. So it's always rubbing up against things. And it has a love of itself. Water likes to stick to itself. And if you spray water, of course, it forms into little droplets. And so water has that energy of clinging. And water would explain why if I drop my keys, they fall to the floor. We say that's because of gravity. In holistic science such as Ayurveda, they would say, well, that's just demonstrating the attraction that matter has for itself through the water element. And then if we drop down to the earth below, earth is also matter, right? Or what we experience as a substance. I can hold a handful and drop it to the floor. And earth, though, however, as compared to water, is going to be the principle or the experience of solidity and mass and volume. If you push on the earth, it pushes back. That's how we walk. If you walk, you push backward on the earth, and the earth pushes you forward. So it has that resistant quality built into it. So the experience of solidity is the experience of earthiness. And so as you can see, there's always these things in every experience. If somebody can name an experience that doesn't have those qualities in there, I'd be interested to see what that is. So how does that relate to people and health? Well, if air, fire, space, water, and earth are in every experience, and a human being is an experience, then we can see, okay, well, how do they relate to our experience of being alive? And sir, if you would cue up the next illustration here. So if we want to see how these elements shape and form us, well, the good place to go is to go to the beach because we have less clothing on and you can see the bodies there. Now, if I said a minute ago that the wind tends to be sort of shrinking and drying and very light, no mass to it, which of these bodies, if you're looking at this picture, would you say might be shaped by the wind? Anybody, if you would say, is the person on the right who is heavy and sitting on the ground, Is that more windy? Or how about the real thin one on the other side of the page, who is so thin he has to hold his pants up because there's nothing there to
Yeah.
keep them on? So that's what a wind person looks like. So you think of the qualities of the wind are to shrink down. The wind is light. It's very pure and ethereal. There's not a lot of mass there. So it shapes, wind has a shaping effect and has a shrinking effect. So there you see, you're going to see a very thin body. And the wind is erratic, right? The wind stops, it starts, it swirls. Coming from the left, it's coming from the right. So this person will tend to have an erratic nature in some ways. They're not going to be real steady people. They're going to have windy qualities. And if we look at just the physical body here, in addition to the thinness, you'll see that the joints are knobby. If we can see it in a large enough, you'd see that the veins protrude through the skin. You see a lot of tendons. The bones, the collarbones tend to protrude. The neck is going to be long and thin, like kind of giraffe-like. And the head, now I didn't really, this whole thing I did in 45 minutes. It was a rush job for a presentation. The head could be a little more triangular. So if you hear the word egghead, so that's going to be referring to the kind of person who is more windy. And they're book smart and life dumb. They're not really practical people. The jaw tends to be kind of what we think of as a weak jaw. The classic person I think of for that, illustrating that, is Don Knotts. Remember Don Knotts from Andy Griffith's show when we were all children?
Yeah.
That kind of weak chin. And if we think of a weak chin, that's a person that you don't tend to trust that much, right? They're kind of indecisive. And and the Vata person, the mind is very windy. It's very erratic. It's very spontaneous. Now, these aren't all insight. I mean, I'm sorry. They're not saying that these things are all bad. It's just that that's the way the mind tends to go. It's very hard for the wind doesn't stick. It doesn't settle on things. It blows over. So it touches everything, but doesn't tend to stick. And so the mind of the Vata, this is called a Vata person, V-A-T-A, the wind. The mind tends to be very curious, very active, and interested in what everybody has to say, can see all the different sides to an argument, but has a very hard time settling, like which of these arguments is the right one. And Vata people tend to go online and they'll research, and their mind follows every little pop-up that comes on the computer, and they end up being more lost and confused than they were when they started their research project there. The bones tend to be kind of erratic on the Vata person. The teeth tend to be crooked and crowded together. And if you could see my smile, I could show you an example of that. Um, they're very often the kind of people, like when they smile, their mouth opens and you see their gums instead of their teeth. It's like things are just a little bit erratic or a little bit off with the Vata person. Now, which person would you think would be related to the fire outside in this grouping here? Right, so there's actually two that I would call very fiery. One of them is coming into the party on his surfboard and his big bright red and orange surfboard uh, facing up to the sun. That's what a fire person is like. So if I say a person is windy, you already have certain ideas about that person. For the wind person, we might say they're bubbly or perky or spacey. Those are all qualities that are in the language that describe the Vata or the wind person. Now, excuse me, how about if I say a person is fiery? So in our language, we really already know. A fiery person, are they mellow and relaxed? or are they more action oriented? Which would you think?
Definitely action oriented.
So the fire person likes action. They like experiences. And would you think that there might be competitive? That this action person really enjoys competing and they really want to win. And they're the one that go, ha ha, when they do win. And if they lose, oh, I hate to lose. So they're kind of like, they have that kind of fiery energy. How about if somebody has a fiery temper? What kind of a temper is that, right? Or a hot temper? So you can see the fire person has to deal with they're irritable. That fire is burning in there all the time and it's looking for outlets. So they like big experiences. Fiery people have big appetites, right? Because that inner fire, you feed it food, it burns it up and wants more. So there's a big appetite for food. Usually like hot, spicy things because they like being fire, and they like alcohol. They like drugs. They like big experiences. They want to go beyond, the common, the normal that's boring for them. They tend to wear bright colored clothes. If you see somebody who comes in with red and yellow and orange, and they have, really cool looking glasses that are, unique. They have a leopard skin coat on. Those are the signs that you're dealing with a fire person, because fire is bold and brassy by its nature. And it likes to, if I said before, if there's a campfire, everybody naturally gathers around the fire. So it likes to be the center of attention by and large. Now, fire has those two main qualities of heat, which translates into passion in the fire person. So that's your burning desire, right? That a fire person would have. They tend to be passionate, very motivated, very excited and enthusiastic. That's their nature. Now, it doesn't always come out that way because life has a way of interfering, but the fire person is born with that. Now, how do you recognize a fire person? They have a medium build. The windy person is very narrow and slender and has a hard time putting weight on. The fire person has a medium build, can put weight on, but also can burn it off again, right? So they have a good metabolism and they can burn the excess weight off as soon as they put their mind to it. But their appetites are big and they can overeat and put weight on quite easily too. Now the guy on the surfboard is crashing the party. Hey, look out, here comes fire. They kind of have, here I am, deal with it. And go big or go home. There's kind of a whole way of being that the fire has. But it also, fire's related to the light. And our little baby down there, you can see the sun is pointing right down to the baby. That kind of spark, that curiosity. So fire can have a very wonderful, sparkling, dazzling kind of a personality that is just in love with the beauty of the world. The light shining on everything and just wants to explore, is happy to be alive, a sunny disposition. That's also part of being fire. Now, excuse me, is fire good or bad? Fire is the light we can see, and it's the heat. So we like to have a fire in the fireplace to keep us warm and to cook our food and to power our cars and on and on. So we like a lot of things about fire, but fire, of course, also can burn the house down. It's a nuclear explosion. So with all of these, there's going to be a plus side and a minus side, or an entire yin and yang of experience that goes with each. Now, if we move over to the seated couple on the right of the picture, now these are water and earth figures. The woman in the chair is water. Now I posed her facing away because frankly, I didn't know how to draw women. And so I just showed her back in this picture. But she's more of the watery aspect. This is called kapha. Kapha, K-A-P-H-A, comprises both water and earth. And if, these are, remember from the previous slide, this is where the substance is. So these are people with more physical substance. Now, does everybody have a physical body? Of course. Even the skinny guy on the other side has kapha because he has flesh and blood, water and earth. But he doesn't have them in the same proportion as the person on the right. So you recognize the kapha person by having their heavy bone structure. And if they're more on the watery side of the water-earth combination, then they're going to be round and soft like water. And the hair will be thick and lustrous. The head will tend to be round with big round eyes, big soft lips, and round cheeks, round body, nice and soft, like the Pillsbury Doughboy. So this is the kind of softness that you can poke your finger into. So that would be more the watery side. And then the man to her on the right of the picture, he's more the earthy side. So here you have more solidity. And there's massive structure in the bones. And the muscles tend to be very big, even without lifting weights or exercising. These are those people you meet that have huge calves, big thighs, big hips, broad chest, deep muscles in the shoulder, and very little neck. So if you're seeing the real earth person, I said the air person has a triangular head where the top is wide and the jaw is narrow. The earth person has like a volcano sticking out of their shoulders, right? The neck is very thick, very short. The jaw is massive and the cranium actually tapers a little bit. The actor John Goodman is a good illustration of what a kapha person looks like. And if you think earthy, well, you say, okay, salt of the earth. The person is grounded. So you can see now this is a very stable person, very practical, good with their hands, like to work with their hands, build things, very patient, very methodical in the way they do things, where that other guy is spontaneous and can't keep his focus. The kapha person, excuse me, can make a plan and stick with it and, kind of plan it out in a very methodical way and then enact it in a methodical way. I think about the tortoise and the hare, and the hare is the vata. Remember, that's the rabbit. They tend to be nervous, quick, always twitching, always thinking, but the hare goes all over the place and gets distracted and forgets that it's in a race. And meanwhile, that slow moving kapha tortoise patiently and methodically, step by step, goes right for the goal, doesn't stop until he gets there. So you can kind of see how you can compare and contrast all of these different types of people and using their bone structure as your guide in understanding who is who. Now, would you be able to get me some water?
Yeah, sure. And you
Um,
can just shift with the right arrow there.
Okay, thanks. So I'm sorry. Now I'm a vata person. On the other side, we tend to dry out very quickly, and I forgot to get water before I started the lecture here. Is this making sense to people? It's harder to see when yeah, you can follow me so far. No problems there. Okay. So as soon as I get rehydrated here, we will pass on to. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Be right back. Okay. All right, sorry about that, folks. I hope I can talk for a while again. All right, now what I'm going to do at this point is we'll show a couple of slides of each of the different body types. And these are pictures that came to me. I had no idea what I was going to paint. I go up to the easel with an idea, and for a while, the paintings were just going to teach me. I wasn't going to be able to express what I thought I knew, and the paintings showed me a lot more. However, they're just my interpretations of it. I hope the paintings will give you a feeling of the different types, and then you can come up with your own ideas about it. So we're going to talk about the wind person first. Okay, so who's this character here? That's the fiddler on the roof, right? So it's funny, I made this painting right about the time the guy died who made that beautiful play and musical. And so what's he doing? He's up on the roof playing his fiddle. Is that the kind of thing the average guy does? Probably not, right? So the windy, this is the Vata person, the windy person tends to be a little awkward and eccentric. Why is he up on the roof? Well, he's up there playing and he looks pretty happy. You know, if you give this person a life that fulfills who he is or who she is, there's a lot of happiness in being a wind person because it's very fanciful and there's a yearning, you know, the wind person wants to be above the fray because life for the wind person, if you look down below, you'll see there's, you know, people don't understand wind people. There's a guy on the right underneath the violin there who's yelling at him, get off that roof. You know, that's like Rev Tevier in Fiddler on the Roof. The Rev is a coffin man, very practical and traditional. And he's up there like, you idiot, get off the roof. So he's misunderstood down below, but he also, like, that anger and that yelling and so forth is very frightening and distasteful to him. While he's up on the roof, he's, you know, he can hear the music of the sphere. This is the area of creativity, of being in solitude and, you know, being able to hear the music and play back to it in a way. So creativity, sensitivity, awareness, purity, these are the things that the Vata person lives in. And also goes up because beneath his feet there is fear. Fear is what the Vata person has to learn to deal with. And those of us who are high Vata are prone to anxiety. Life is scary to the Vata person. However, when he's up in his music, he can forget all of that. He can rise above. And up in that pure realm, that's where the happiness is. Okay, let's look at the next one. All right, now here's another picture of Vata. And if we look at this woman here, would you say she's relaxed and mellow? You know, what's the energy there, right? So her body is very tense. So Vata people tend to hold themselves tightly. Yesterday, when I was out on my bicycle, I passed by a woman and with this kind of a build running, and you could just see like she's running to try to get that tension off, but her fists are right up under, the shoulders are held high, and it's a very tight way of like, instead of being beautiful and running like the wind, that tension was holding her body. So here she is she grounded? And I wanted, as a note, I tried to paint this with her feet on the floor and the painting would not let me do it. So her feet have to come off the floor. This is not a grounded person. She's sitting on her chair, which is the same color as the books she's leaning on. So this is a very cerebral person who will experience life through bookishness or, you know, through life of the intellect. And where's her hand, right? She's Her hand is up, holding her face. It's up, accentuating the head aspect. So this is a person who understands life, lives life through the head. And the head can go to all these abstractions, and you can go out for a walk and be thinking the entire time, and you cannot recount a single moment of the walk other than what you were thinking about. So that's where she lives. But in her other hand, she's holding the bird, right? So, and there's a window out there with kind of a magical looking tree behind it. So if she, for her happiness, for her well-being, she needs to be connected to that world that her book world is closing off and only allowing to come in through the window. I see that bird in her hand kind of looking at her with concern, like, hey, come on out here. This is where the beauty and the mystery that you need to be connected to. So her health is out there, but her life and life of in modern world tends to pull you into this tight, confined area of book knowledge and abstractions and so forth that just simply leaves her in an ungrounded, anxious kind of a state. Okay, next one, please. All you got to do is hit that
Yeah,
button.
that's it.
All right, I think even I can handle that. All right, so now speaking of the mind, here's a mind of a Vata person in action. So first thing to understand and remember is that Vata includes the space, which is still and pure, and it's kind of like a yearning to get to that purity inherent in the Vata person, but the swirling wind of Vata kind of gets in the way. So, if we start down below and move up into the mind of this Vata person here, the first thing you encounter is the mouse and the ant. And so what do those represent? Well, all of the creatures of the world can also be classified as Vata, the wind, Pitta, the fire, or Kapha, the water and earth. So here we're looking at a couple of the animal, you can say, soulmates of the Vata person. The mouse and the ant are a couple of illustrations. So how does a mouse live? Are mice bold? Do they come out relaxed and confident into the world? Or are they kind of like hiding in the corner, skittering around, always looking for something, but fretful, don't want to be seen? So the Vata person is going to have some of that being afraid, like the world is a scary place. I need to go into it, but I like to hide. I like to be in the corner somewhere. How about ants? First you got to think about light and dry and all of the qualities of a Vata person. All insects have those qualities. And an ant is a fiery being in some ways, but if an ant wants to go, from here to there, does it ever go anywhere in a straight line? The ants are always wandering all over the place. So they're very much like the mind of the Vata person, going over, checking everything out, but not settling anywhere, and just sort of, floating, or, go left or go right. And, they encounter another ant, they're super interested in it. There's all this excitement, and then they go their separate ways and so forth. So the Vata mind kind of operates like that. And if we move, upward from that in the center, there's that anxious guy, hands on his head, trying to hold it all together, right? It's the world scares the Vata person often, not always, but if you're brought up in a very loving home, you might be born with certain tendencies, but your upbringing can moderate that. And the upbringing is crucial for the happiness of all people, of course. And recognizing what a person's tendencies are and being able to bring out the best in them is what this is all about. And so the Vata person, you recognize, okay, might tend to be on the anxious side, and we'll deal with that in a couple of ways. So if we go to the right of that figure, you'll see the pair of hands reaching up to the sky. The Vata person has a yearning, and the yearning reaches up. It wants purity, safety, always yearning and up to spirit, appealing to that. And that's where that little sort of nun, that's the color of the nuns that were right here in Rochester, wear that blue. So she's reacting to her world with a sort of a fervent, there's this love of the beauty of nature and the beauty of spirit and purity and a real, like, strong urge to connect to that through spiritual practice. That's Vata. And if you go now from above where she is there, then you'll see there's insects and beautiful flowers, like, and Vata, Pitta, and Kapha will also apply to the plant world. So the plants that are like Vata would be things like Queen Anne's lace, or that are very related to their light, they're dry. There's a lot of tiny little needle-like leaves. The flesh has been carved away by the wind in those plants. And then they have like a dandelion seed that floats on the air. So those are Vata sort of images in the plant world. And then you see the flying insects, the buzzing around, shooting all over the place, the butterfly going from flower to flower. And just like the Vata person, the butterfly gets on one flower. Okay, I'm into this for a minute. Oh, there's another flower over there. And it goes to that one. And as it goes, it's kind of like this, right? It goes up and down and sideways. So the Vata mind is sort of being played out in the activity of the butterfly. Now there's a joy in all of these. So the Vata person is joyful when they get to express and focus in on the loveliness, the beauty of the world and the purity and the spirit. And you see that in the jumping figures and the dancing figures, that sort of aspiring to fulfill that love through activities and the arts and so forth. Right above them is my Native American pipe that seems to want to get into the pictures. And I love the Native American pipe. It's a two-part pipe. And very consciously, when the natives smoke the pipe, they know they're resolving the duality between the yin of the bowl and the yang of and of course, they don't use those terms of the stem. But the pipe comes into play here in the smoke. So the fire transforms the earth substance into smoke. And so smoke carries the prayers up to heaven. That's why the Native Americans, they want to get themselves centered and connected to spirit, and the smoke carries their wishes and prayers up to the spirit ears. And right above that are the birds. Now, birds are obviously Vata animals. However, birds are not all the same, of course. So if we made a spectrum of birds, you could have a very Vata bird would be like little tiny sparrows or hummingbirds, things like that. But there's also Kapha birds. How about a penguin? Penguins, they don't fly. They're very sleek. They're all blubbery and they're in the water, right? So that's you could say a Kapha example of a Vata creature. So the birds are flying up. So this is on the upside, on the right, is the yearning, the purity, the prayer, the joy that is uplifting and buoyant. But then that has a flip side, and there's always a flip side. So the downside of Vata is these birds are diving down and like bearing down on the Vata person who wants to protect him or herself from it. And so that's all the anxieties and the fears and the brutishness of life, the violence and things that they want to be away from. And so there you see the afflictions there. And then you see, the character running away from the fear close to the center there. And then there's the internet on the bottom left of the picture. The internet is very Vata, right? It's ethereal. It's all about communication, which is a Vata attribute. And it's very confusing and overwhelming, and it's addictive and so forth. But it does that through a very Vata medium. So all of us, because of our addiction to the internet, tend to be in a very Vata state these days. And so, the internet contributes to the anxiety and the overwhelmed feeling that so many people have. And then going up in the center of the picture, you see the old-fashioned preacher there, and again, imploring up to the heavens for, and basically, the Vata person usually wants safety. They want connection to spirit because that's their nature, the ethereal, but they also are afraid and want the safety of protection of the heavens. But in the middle, there is a still figure, and that's sort of where Vata meditation tries to bring you, the Vata or anybody, to this place of stillness, and that stillness is holy. That's the source of all that there is. Does that make sense to everybody? We're doing okay? I can't see any reactions out there.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay, so that's a little overview of Vata. Now I'm going to switch over to Pitta, the fire, Pitta. And the first vision of Pitta I'm going to bring up is this one. So Pitta, of course, fire. Fire is wonderful. It's warmth, it's light. But this is where Pitta is unfortunately careening into these days. Now, so this is the dark side of being a light and heat person. So they would call this deranged Pitta. And this is, of course, just look at those teeth. You've got that big open fiery mouth that can never be satisfied, that always wants more. You've got the focus of the eyes, but they're focusing in on you. I'm coming after you. And up on top, you see, there's all my victims. I'm burning them up and I could care less about them. I don't see them. They don't matter to me. All that matters is my burning desire. I want more, give me more. That character, unfortunately, runs most corporations. It's certainly running a lot of government activities around the world where, anytime you get an authoritarian government, anytime you get a rich person, can you be rich enough? No, you always have to be richer. Can you be complacent in your riches and enjoy them? No, you got to protect them. Life is a struggle and a violent struggle, and you need to get more. So, this is an aspect of Pitta. Now, Pitta is sunny, it's all these wonderful things, but this is so predominant that I thought this is an essence that we all need to look at because we're all dealing with it on a daily basis now. So here's another image of Pitta, but this is a little broader. So here we're going to see kind of the sweep of what Pitta can offer. So here with this picture, I would start at the top. There's the sun, there's the light that, is the light behind, you could say, or the light that creates life. It's a unity. But as it comes down into life and our experience of being alive, the crown on that central figure's head shows now we've turned it into a duality. And that duality, when it comes to light, of course, is the heat and the light. Our job is to, if we follow his hair down, 2 sides to the hair, 2 sides to the collar, but then ultimately in the Ayurvedic understanding of life, our job is to pull the 2 back, reunite the pairs of opposites into unity again. And that's what life is all about. And that's what's being shown here. And then the king there, that central sun king figure, is sitting on a throne with the basically dividing the light into the 4, because the light is the essence of the wind, the fire, the earth, and the water. And so now that king figure is separating the picture into 2 sides. So on the left of the picture, there's that same character that we just looked at, right? The sharp teeth. Sharpness is a basic fire that tends to burn wood into sharpens as it burns. So all sharp objects are seen as part of fire. And if you look at him, he's sort of like just focusing there. He's got his knife. He's ready to get violent, and he's sort of pushing the table over like, don't hold me back. So fire, it's very active, but in this case, this is the side of passion and greed and, I want more. I don't care how I get it. That's the deranged side of fire. And then behind him, there's all the suffering that causes. And we see this evident in the news every day you look. So there's one side. On his other side, now, this is the side of light. And light has to do with intellect and judgment, love of knowledge. So the figure seated on the left side of the king, but on the right of the picture, the first one is looking at the light with reverence, right? So that's the scholarly sort of wanting to understand through intellect. And if somebody is smart, do we say that they're dim or do we say that they're bright, right? So we associate the light with intelligence and lack of intelligence with being dim. So, and if somebody's really smart, what do you call them? They're brilliant, right? So the light is intelligence and intellect. And intellect in this case is he's contemplating what that last figure there is supposed to indicate. And this is, again, now I didn't know what I was painting, and I'm looking at it just like you are, but I interpret that as, you could say, ultimate illumination or enlightenment, where the individual, through the grace of spirit, sees through the duality and attains the unity once again. They call that the transcendent experience. So that being enlightenment or illumination tells you that there's a relationship to light. Now, what about, you look at that figure's hand, reaching across the table, and then that's reaching out to the other figure's hand, and there's a relationship there with the candlelight in the middle. So what that tells me is that the pendulum swings back and forth between passion and violence and everything that goes with it over to the other. Right now the dial or the flame in this case is pointing to that passion violence side, which we're I'm seeing all around us, all around the world. But it's kind of like the light handed it off, and then the swing goes to one side, it's going to swing back, and the light will predominate again, and we can look for understanding more, being more compassionate, being more connected, as another possibility held in fire. And then this last fire slide here. Now this one has a lot going on. I painted this probably 8 years ago. And when I pulled it out to look at it for this presentation, I finally understood what it is. And again, because it wasn't a conscious effort here. So when I look at this painting, I'd start at the light in the center again, because that light is the center of everything. But it's coming down. The first image I see there is Jesus on the cross. And the center of that cross is Jesus's heart. And you might not be able to see it if your picture is not big enough, but that heart has that sacred fire. And why do we have that image? Because I am the light and the life, right? So the cross is the place where the vertical of the light meets the horizontal of the earth, and the crossroads is where life happens. So another way of saying that is eternity coming into time through the place where the crossroads of the cross, and in the human that is infused into the heart. So the heart is the essence, right? And if we say you put your heart into it, you put your whole being into it. If you put your mind into it, like the Vata person, well, that's an aspect of you. But your heart really represents the entirety of you. And every spiritual writing, and no matter what religion it is, always refers to the heart. You never see appeals to the brain in any of this ancient literature. So the heart is the organ through which life enters you, and through which life, through Jesus, if you're a Christian, enters into the world. And all of the characters around that central figure of Jesus and the heart radiate from that like spokes. So that it's almost like here's all the different, the whole breadth of humanity is a reaction to that heart of Jesus. And you can react to it in a conscious way, like the two little figures that are right under there. We have that, again, the Native American with his pipe, whose head, the heart points right at him. That's a person who strives to live in his or her heart, because that's what their teachings, the wisdom is. And for him, the bowl of the pipe represents the blood, it represents the mother. He's putting the entire universe into the bowl. It's a way of connecting to that sacred heart. And then just below the pipe, there's also it looks like a more like Islamic bowing to that heart. And no matter what the religion is, it's the same thing. You're appealing to that higher source of light that comes in through the heart. But we also see there's a spear. There's somebody. If there's a heart there, I'm going to kill it. I'm going to try to stab it. And now, of course, the little Roman soldier there can't get at the heart, but he can pierce the skin. So as soon as light is made manifest as flesh, it's prone to attack and blood and the whole spectrum of human experience. And that spectrum, if we go to the right upper part of the picture, we can see different fire characters showing up like in the dream images. The first one is the raptor, up on top, the sharp claws, the focus, laser focus. That's part of being a pitta or a fire. It's predatory, and in predators in nature serve a very important purpose, and they keep the balance. Predatory humans, which of course is what we're interested in here, of course they don't keep the balance. They create imbalance because they're, as the first picture showed, it's never satisfied. It always wants more, where the predator in nature wants a meal and then wants to go hang out and relax. They're not always in a fiery, competitive, destructive mode. They only can dip into fierceness when needed, but can move to complete relaxation otherwise. Below the wings of that predator, there we have our competitor, the football player who's got his hand out saying no to the heart. I'm not interested in all that sacred baloney. Life is a competition, and I'm here to win. And I'm just going to focus on that aspect only. And then his feet go down to, there's the predator again. And as I said, there's your boss, leaning over the table. What have you done for me lately? That's a predator that's never satisfied. So, and fiery people are never satisfied. That they can be, of course, if they develop themselves, but that fire is always burning, and I always want more. Not satisfied with what I have, I got to have more. And that's because we're a materialistic society that promotes that, frankly. Now, in front of that, tiger in a suit there's a woman soaring. So we want to keep the positive part here in mind as well, because the pitta person has tremendous potential. The light, if you're guided by the light and you're interested in using your focus and your energies for creating something beautiful, or inventors are very pitta oriented people. They take ideas and then make them into something practical and something that lifts people up. So fire very definitely has that. And then down below her, there's the scholar, working away, studying. That's also fire energy. And then as we come up again, swinging across, we have our Roman soldier who is delighted, right, to be sticking his spear into that, trying to kill that heart. It's fun. There are people who enjoy violence. Some people love to be soldiers. And that's distorted fire. Once again, that love of violence. And then you see the judge, kind of a depressed, morose looking judge. So judgment is a fire uh, characteristic, but being judgmental is also a fire characteristic. Fiery people judge other people and themselves and tend to be very harsh. And if we, sharpness, remember, is a fire attribute, so they have a sharp tongue, or people say acid tongue. Those are fire images. Now, moving across, there we see the salesperson, right? He's got his hand reaching up to that heart of Jesus, but he's exploiting it. And in this, I look at this guy like he's whipping up fear. He's whipping up a mob, and he's doing it for his own purposes, not for the good of the mob, of course, but for something he's going to get out of it. And his corollary up above is you whip up fear in order to get anger flaming. And then you get angry, fearful people, and this is very pertinent for our times. Then you can get them to do things that people wouldn't ordinarily do. And certainly you'll put Hitler's face right there, and that's what you'll see. And then next to them, there's a character who looks like he's being, he's trapped by the devil there. So that devil there, of course, the devil is fire imagery all the way, right? Hell is the lake of fire. And the devils have the sharp claws and the sharp horns and the sharp teeth. But this devil is delighted here, right? This is not a devil who's just reveling in suffering, but enjoys getting people into addiction or temptation. And those things have a thrill to them, right? So there's a thrill to these kinds of temptations that get you off the path and lost. And one of his feet is on top of the self-flagellating figure in that bottom left. So fire people very definitely can get lost and lose their spark and their liveliness in self-flagellation. Why did I do that? What's the matter with me? You know, I'm such a bad person, that kind of thing. And then up above, there's the green army tank with the fiery tread there with the explosion. That's on, fire, of course, as well. War is fire when fire is gone to that dark side. Now the devil has his other hand trying to grasp the shoulder of, and that's supposed to be the Buddha, I think there. So enlightenment is, in the Ayurvedic perspective, of course, this is an enlightenment culture. You go through that whole sweep of humanity and experience all of those various things with the ultimate goal of reestablishing your proper connection to the light. And then the light is your exit out of the world of, the veil of tears and suffering. Does that make sense? Are we all together so far? I know I'm talking a mile a minute over here, but.
No, makes sense.
Okay. So that's the pitta. I'm going to look, we'll get briefly into the kapha at this point. So here's the earthy aspect. And, these pictures, again, I didn't control them. I just look at them after and try to figure them out. And they tend to show some of the pathological side of the different constitutions, or these are doshas. So the central characters here right up front, we have the bent over figure carrying the, that bale of hay or whatever it is there. This is the work a day, put your effort in, put your back to it, use your strength, your endurance of being an earthy guy, and just earn your share. So that person's willing to work for you as long as you let them share in the spoils, which are material in nature. So this earth person is going to be more materialistic, may be religious, but if they are religious, it's usually the old time religion, it's tradition. I follow it, I don't think about it, I'm just loyal to it, because loyalty is very much an earthy attribute. So he's willing to do his work. He's got his own staff there that he props himself up on, but he's looking up at his controller. So the way that the world works is you've got your bully who holds the economy of work together by imposing violence on those who wish to break the rules. So that's that blue figure. That's how I understand him. And he is an agent of the king in the background. And you see the king up there in his tower looking over his kingdom, but is he happy with that, right? Does that work? Like, so this group will look for material gain and stability and trying to produce a future and so forth. But as Jesus said in the Bible, and I can't quote it because I don't know the Bible well enough, but Jesus specifically says, don't bother to try to store up grain, because thieves will break in, moths are going to eat it, rust consumes. That's a futile way of being, but the earth person are very drawn to this, and is very drawn to controlling, because it does get out of control so easily because of the thieves and the moths and the rust and so forth. But he's dedicated to sort of holding it together with his will. And that will that tends to want to hold and make things stable is one of the things that the earth person, that's what they have to overcome. The wind vata person has to overcome fear and anxiety. The pitta fire person, it's his irritability and anger. And then this earth person has to overcome this will to own and to stay in the material realm. Now here's more of the watery aspect of the kapha. And if we see, now we have our beautiful, this was as beautiful as I could make her anyway, because I wanted to show the beauty of the water. So this is that round body type that we talked about. But the striking thing on the kneeling woman is she's got that big rose right at her heart. And of course, a rose is a heart image. So water is very much connected to love. That's water is, and love would be the fire of excitement, of love, of the fire penetrating into the water of life. And so love is a watery condition. Kapha people, if they're, if circumstances permit it, tend to be more loving and relaxed people, especially on the water. When you say go with the flow, that's a water image. That's the way watery people, tolerant, loving. And if you look up into her chef hat up there, her hat, excuse me, you can see the heart up there, and then the doors, like it's the, the water and the love are the gateway to paradise on earth. But then you look at her male counterpart, the other chef here, and you look at his eyes, you see there's more of a sadness there. So watery people are very feelings oriented, and their lives are very much about how they feel, and they like to share. He's got his big bowl full of watery dough there. That dough is the image of a water food, sweet, carbohydrate laden and moist. And he wants to share that, but of course, then the customer tries to, walk out without paying, and it hurts his feelings. I gave him this, and what do I get back? So water tends towards to being sad. Tears, of course, are the expression of water in the body. And if you look up into his cap, his chef hat, there's a figure there, a little harder to make out, holding his head, crying, all hunched and bent over. So water, of course, is going to have, just like we saw all those different fire characters, all of these have their own characteristics and a whole spread that go from what we would consider positive all the way to the negative side. And then last slide here, here's more watery people. And this is kind of like if we wanted to see the sins of the watery or earthy people, you could say sloth and greed are going to be personified here. Now, they're all at the bar. It's a lazy day. Watery has that, okay, if you don't spark the kapha person, they tend to become very routine. They love comfort. They love predictability, stability. They're very habitual. They do the same things over and over, and just comfortable leaning on each other, hanging out. You know, you can picture like, hey, you see this guy here, he's the best guy in the whole world. You know, that kind of, that's watery imagery of, you know, but it's kind of like the downside of being, you're not using that love to build each other up, but rather to just kind of, you know, wallow together. And so you see the sleepy figures at the table, the kind of easygoing, the guy with his hands on his knee, just sitting there, taking it all in, not very reactive. You know, you could think of, you know, again, I like to bring in animals. In this case, like if you had a big grassy field and you had a bunch of cows in it and a deer, you know, so this would be kind of like the cows, or the world's going by, I'm not interested. The work, you know, my field is like a giant dinner plate, and I'm just going to work my way across the plate here and munch and eat through the day. And if a, you know, car goes by, the cow could care less. But if you put a deer in the field, who is a Vata image of a cow-like animal, much more alert, right? The deer in the headlights. So if a car goes by, the deer perks up. Is that scary? Do I need to run? And the car goes away. Okay, I'll go back to eating again. So that's all very kapha energies there. And then we have our greed character all the way on the left of the picture. And the kapha person can spend or make his life about amassing wealth and gathering, you know, objects and, you know, that kind of thing. And as he does so, he shrinks his heart, because the heart is the, you know, the kapha person can be big-hearted, especially with people who they consider to be part of their us, the family, the church they go to, you know, their friends and so forth. But as if you become more materialistic, the heart will shrink. And you can see he's looking at his little tiny heart in his hand. He's got all his, you know, amassed all of his wealth, and he's very proud of it and so forth. And he even likes contemplating, in order to get here, I had to shrink down my heart, but that's okay. That's kind of what it takes to be a success in the world. So that's all the pictures I have, folks. I'm certainly willing to answer any questions or take any comments at this time. I think we've been at it for a long time, and you're probably ready to get up and go at this point. Are there any questions about anything? All right.
George, I have a question.
Yeah.
Or 12. So does Ayurveda consider people to be blends of these different types sometimes?
Yes.
Or are they
Right. So the point here is, right, so there's these basic constitutional types, the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha. But remember now, if we were to try to like think like where's the most Vata part of the human being, it would be the nervous system. So who has a nervous system? Everybody. So the Vata, the movement, the thinking, that's present in every person, but much more predominant in one person than another. And then where's the Pitta show up in the person? The heat. Where does your heat come from? It's your metabolism, right? So the heat is stored in food. You break the food down, that heat transfers to your body. And of course, the heart is the organ of heat, as we talked about, and it sends the heat through the body via the blood, which it heats up and then sends out. So who has a metabolism? Everybody. But for some people, the metabolism is very predominant. And for other people, it would tend to recede a bit. And then the kapha, the water and earth, of course, are the flesh and blood. You know, and if you looked at take all the tissues in the human body, and then you went from the earth, the hard side, over to the watery side, you can make a spectrum just like that first slide. You have teeth, bones, cartilage, and connective tissues, and organs, and then blood, and then lymph, and cerebrospinal fluids very fine on the other end. So there's a continuum there in the body that I think is worth noting, that water and earth are very much related. And you think of them together, they're mud, so that's the human body is differentiated mud, but everybody has flesh and blood. So when you talk about a person, they'll say, now I, for example, am called a Vata Pitta. So I'm windy first and foremost, which has kept me going for the last hour and a half, but I'm also Pitta, so my being will tend to alternate between the two. Sometimes I can be laser focused of the Pitta and get a lot done that way. And then other times I'm going to be, more spacey or erratic and so forth, and I'll be in more of a windy state. Then you can have a Pitta Kapha, for example. That's very common. If you look at most politicians, leaders tend to be fiery. So that's the nature of a fiery person, is to want to come out front. Not that they all do by any stretch, but that's a common thing. And then they like to argue and then win and force their view and, have other people succumb. Think of Donald Trump as a perfect image of a fiery person who just wants to win. And that all that matters is winning. And so that kind of a person gets drawn into politics. And then you can see the politicians, all they care about is winning elections. So their fire is focused primarily, and that's cynical, which is fiery. Fiery people tend to be cynical, but politicians, when I see them, primarily just want to win. That's their Pitta. So you can see that, so everybody is going to be called either, like you could say a person's Vata, but generally they're going to be either Vata Pitta, and there's also a Vata Kapha. Then there's Pitta, Pitta Kapha, and then Kapha Pitta, just depending on whether the person is more earthy and watery or more fiery. And usually I like to do this in person because then it's fun for people to stand up and you can look at each other and say, okay, I can see there's the Vata, there's the Pitta, and there's the Kapha. A little harder to do in this setting, but even like who would have the most fire of the people who are here viewing right now? I can see between Jenna, Jill, Candace, Irene, and Sarah, the most Pitta would be Candace. When Candace comes in, it's like, hello, there's a bright presence, right? And she's there. That's the way Pitta people are. The rest of us are really all Vata Pittas, wind and fire people. And they always say Vata first because it's the wind that moves everything. So if you're trying to stay balanced, and they would define health as a state of balance, that darn wind keeps coming in and blowing everything off course. And if you think about the mind and its tendencies to, make mountains out of molehills and show bad judgment and be, all kinds of things, the mind, the wind is the destabilizing element there. Any other questions?
I would like to say that I am incredulous as to your paintings. They just blow me away.
Yeah, they blew me away too. They always surprised me. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think you knew what you were doing.
I learned how to paint as I did them. The first ones were crayons and watercolors, and one thing led to another. It's really. But
you included so many different elements in it. It blew me away.
Thank you.
I'm impressed.
They taught me a lot of what I know about Ayurveda. It really was a great experience to do those. I wish they would come back. They came of their own accord, and then they just won't come anymore. It's really, yeah.
Well, I just want to say, I feel like I could learn so much more about this topic. I feel like I've kind of just scratched the surface.
We did.
But I have a rally, a BLM rally that I am going to go to, so I need to.
Yeah, well, thank you all. That took a long time, and I appreciate everyone's attention, and that was a lot of fun. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that.
You're welcome. The pleasure was mine. yeah.
Thank you, George. And
Yeah.
it didn't seem like a long time.
Well, good.
Mhm.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. No one fell asleep, so that's
Nope.
good. Okay, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye now.